Bob, I'm so glad you're here to
No,
share
I
with
read
us
it. Timbra
today.
put it on the chat and I saw it.
Yeah, I'm so glad you're here today to share with us how you came to what is it,
Right?
radically
Yeah.
authentic discovery,
You could just say rad.
and and you're really the inspiration of why we're doing this series on post-sale selling. So
Wow.
I am so glad to have you here, and please introduce yourself briefly. That would be great.
So, after a career in the corporate world, I became a consultant, primarily first of all, thanks for having me, Jan, and everybody. This looks like an amazing place to just hang out every Tuesday night. And it is nighttime here in DC. But I was a consultant. I've been a consultant for a long time, and primarily for the first part of my consulting career, what's referred to as a fractional chief marketing officer. And I was doing brand strategy and positioning and messaging work. And I was meeting with founders and CEOs of tech companies. And I just got one day, I was talking to a founder and I said, so who are your customers? Why do they buy? Why do they sometimes not buy? Why do they stay or leave after a year? What problem do you solve? And this particular founder was answering, but just didn't seem to have much conviction in his answers. And we both noticed his lack of conviction at the same time. It was a very transparent conversation. And I said, you know what? Rather than sort of going off and starting with the lowercase m marketing, tactics, why don't I just do a customer listening tour for you? And because he is such an enlightened, curious person, he said yes. And that was 2,700 discovery conversations ago. So I've been doing a lot of listening and customer discovery interviews for my clients. And that led to me developing just much more interesting questions that were focused on what's going on with the customer when we vendors are not around.
Mm-hmm.
And also better listening techniques, which I always have to joke that while I've become a better listener professionally, here at home, I get a lot of shit for not being a good listener. So pardon my French. And so about 3 or 4 years ago, I was introduced to Jay Nathan just by kind of happenstance. And he suggested that I speak at a CS roundtable he was putting together. And I was like, why? I barely knew what CS was. And so he explained that my discovery and listening techniques and approach were interesting and that CS really needed to do better in those areas and be more strategic. And so it opened my eyes to the wonderful, generous, curious world of CS. And I've been
Mm-hmm.
teaching and doing training and speaking and workshops and writing a lot about how to use, I guess the way I think of it with CS is like, you guys are so curious and authentic and transparent. Why not see if we can pour some gasoline on those skills and create a bigger fire in terms of understanding the customer, and then by extension being able to contribute more internally to the success of our business, which of course lately means revenue. I think that gets us up to date
Yeah,
with
yeah.
me. Yeah, I hope
Well,
that wasn't too
it's
long.
really that intention, right? It's like we can all be curious, but what is the intention? Where are you taking that? So
Right,
I
right.
love that. All right, let's show the slides here. We've got radically authentic discovery. And really, as we were talking about it, this is really the first step, I think, in post-sales revenue. And I think, as Cynthia was saying earlier, even salespeople don't always have are not always practiced at discovery questions. So it's really the first step in understanding how to help your customers achieve success, really. And what
Yeah, if I could
what
just
do they
can I
need?
chime in a little on that?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just think all of us are trained in that. It's like we have to know how to pitch and talk about the product first and then listen. And it really
Mm-hmm.
is so backwards in so many cases, because the only reason anything that comes out of our mouth is relevant to the customer is because it aligns with what their problems and priorities are. And so listening has become the thing that, oh, our company is great at listening, and but a whole product was built and a whole go-to-market series of activities were created and the customer may have changed, so I wanted to say that that's why I think Jan really lit up when we were talking about this, that it's the first step in generating revenue is understanding the customer
Yep.
better. What do they define as the right outcome for them?
And that's something too, where when I was in sales, I was trained in consultative sales. Um, Actually nothing really formal, just that was our approach to it. And then I think too, what happens is once they become your customer, it's all consultative sales. It's always, you're always trying to understand, kind of what's out there in the marketplace. How are they reacting to it and responding to it? How is your product going to help them? How does that intersection between the customer and your company, and where it gets to. So that's why then after this, we'll be also then digging into qualifying opportunities, CSQLs and pipelines, that sort of thing, and then negotiations, because all of these are kind of like three critical skills. There's a lot of other things that go along with it perhaps, but I would say, like, if you're really going to get to the nitty-gritty, like, these three pillars are what it takes to really understand not just selling, whether it's pre-sales or post-sales, but also just helping your customers, and doing it in a way that also allows you to stay in business, right? Because we only get to stick around if we stay in business. But maybe, Bob, you want to dig into kind of the CS assets as we were talking about them.
Yeah, and this actually came up in another webinar that I was attending, and the idea was, like, if you're looking at a customer success team or customer success individual contributors, and you say, well, we need them to be more accountable for revenue, forget exactly what that means and what the role is do you start teaching them like hard sales skills like negotiating and closing, and or do you start with where CS is today, which is this inventory of assets that we alluded to a few minutes ago? They already have customer trust. The customer doesn't feel like they're always going to have to be sort of holding onto their wallet when they're talking to CS, which is a good thing. Engagement, transparency, that's something CS is really known for, in my view and my personal experience. And CS being curious about things that aren't, like with sales, I always say that the curiosity is a tool to advance the sales process. Like it's a choreography, and the curiosity is, you just have to have enough curiosity in sales to understand how to get to the next meeting or conversation or the next stage of the sales cycle. But with CS, it seems to be, in my experience, a broader, authentic curiosity. So the consensus in this webinar I was talking about, and in a LinkedIn post I did afterwards, like, no, instead of trying to convert people in CS into actual salespeople, it's better to just curate and nurture and upskill them on the things they're already good at, which are the things in this sort of inventory of assets. So that's where that came from. And I'm curious of people's thoughts on that too.
I mean, and I would say too, when people talk about, well, if I'm going to be a trusted advisor, how can I sell to my customers? But in fact, if you think about it, you don't buy anything from someone you don't trust. You only purchase things from people you do trust, right? And so trust and understanding, understanding the customer's pain points, and presenting that, as I was talking about in the last session, presenting to the right person the right product at the right time. When you have that shows that you understand them, that shows that they can trust you, and with that trust, then that's why, you don't want to be the used car salesman just throwing a bunch of stuff at them, like, hey, take this, and selling them things that they don't need, right? So you don't want to set your customer, your company, and yourself up for failure by selling in things that they don't need. But it's really, trust is the foundation of selling, I would say. And I think that CSMs in that respect are well positioned to participate in that post-sales process, whether you're doing CSQLs or the actual sales process. Any thoughts? I know I have a number of people who are sales leaders and sales contributors in there. careers, anything folks want to share before, because we have some other things to dig into, but just on this point. Anything inspiring? If you're not inspired, it's okay. Oh yeah.
I think
Sean?
just to emphasize the point you made, I learned long ago that particularly in sales, I'm there to earn that next conversation and build that relationship from scratch almost. And it's very important to consider from a CS perspective as well. If you're not providing value in each and every interaction you're having with a customer, then you have no business discussing any sort of retention or expansion with that particular customer. You've really got to understand why you're there, spending time with them. And if you're doing a great job, what you'll start to see is customers will want to spend time with you, and those conversations will happen organically, as opposed to having to feel awkward, or maybe you don't feel awkward because you're being told to do it, but having to sort of interject, oh, what about that contract? Or let me get you, in touch with my account manager, right? Like that's the stuff that no one enjoys doing.
Right. And also when you think about it, if you are delivering impact in that post-sales motion, then they're more likely interested in the renewal and expansions conversations as well, right? And so if they understand that they have been getting an ROI from your product and what that ROI is in a way that they agree with, then they're going to come on board. Exactly. And so it's a number of different ways to provide value. Mary Beth.
Oh, I just wanted to say I really appreciate this conversation. This is the first one of these meetings I've attended. Right now I'm trying to transition from being in sales management to customer success management, and this conversation just really makes me feel even more confident that this is where I want to be. So thank you.
That's great. I understand that too. I went from sales to post sales because I didn't want to let go of the customer. I was like, wait a minute. So wait, in SaaS, like sales is all just hunting? Like, no. I got to go to post sales. It's a great place to be. Welcome, Mary Beth. Welcome to CxXchange and SuccessHour and to CS generally.
Much appreciated.
Absolutely. Okay, so radically authentic discovery. See, ask, and STIFU. STFU. Tell us about that, Bob.
Yeah, so I love how so I have a way of describing these three components of the methodology, and Jan took it down to one word each, the first two, and I love it. So here, think about it this way. I want you to just imagine that the word see is how holistically do you see the person to whom you're speaking? I call it opening the aperture, which if you know anything about lenses or photography, it's the opening in to let more light. Stop seeing the customer as a user of the product or even a buyer of the product or a customer. Start seeing them as a contributor to something that's important in their company. Someone that has not only a job to do, but that job is only being funded because the company needs them to accomplish something. So don't just see them as a person who is within an organization and that organization is trying to turn a profit. That means you have to ask about the company that they're with and what's important to the company. And we're not going to really get into the what I call disruptive questions today, but one of them is just to give you an idea. You'd start by asking, hey, if I could sneak into your next senior leadership meeting or board meeting, what's the biggest priority or challenge I would hear them discussing? Ty knows all these by heart. And so what's the biggest priority they'd be discussing? And why do you ask that? First of all, it disarms them and they're not used to a vendor asking a non-vendor type question. And second of all, you could get an insight as to where the company's budget and resources are flowing. And that, of course, gives you an opportunity to understand how the value of your solution aligns with that big priority. So that's C, is keep a big open aperture.
We have that in Radically Authentic Discovery cheat sheet, right? Oh
yeah.
Yeah. So you don't have to worry if you don't have that cheat sheet. It is in the slide resources here.
Yeah. Excellent. So that's C. Ask is, I guess I just naturally went into ask a moment ago. Asking questions that disrupt the customer's normal thought pattern of what a vendor meeting is. And how do you do that? You ask about them. You ask about them and their world. So the board meeting example I just gave is you're using a hook that it comes up in their world all the time. It may not be the board meeting, it may be the executive leadership meeting. And so you're asking questions, not from the vendor's point of view, but asking questions to really understand what they're up against, what they're trying to accomplish as a business. So that's ask. And that, I have a toolkit of 16 of these disruptive questions for different parts of the buyer journey and customer journey.
And this is
ready?
STFU.
Well, can you go back one? I don't want to, I want to just speak to it for 1 second.
Okay.
So the other big thing is, we talked about it before, is what you say to a customer is only as impactful as what you heard them say first. And so because I'm a former marketing guy, I guess I had to come up with a better way of saying, listen, it's important to listen. So I called it STFU, but it stands for something different. It's not naughty. It's silence till you fully understand. And then to emphasize the fact that the only reason we're doing any of these things is to generate revenue or growth. So that's where the $ came from. So silence till you fully understand. You guys, 2 ears, 1 mouth. Don't listen to respond, listen to understand. You've heard it said different ways. It refers to just listening and making the conversation all about the customer. And here's some details. Jan, do you want me to go through quickly?
You go through a little bit.
Yeah.
I know that we need to head out to breakout rooms, but it's the breakout room conversation is all about this. So let's dig into this for a couple minutes. Yep. Yeah.
So what I've done is kind of codified the listening techniques and sort of ideas that have worked for me and that I have taught to many people and that they say have worked. So I think that the breakouts, if I understand correctly, are going to be, which one of these do you need to work on the most? So let me explain them. Start every important conversation with a quiet mind. You don't have to do a yoga class or do transcendental meditation. Just take 30 seconds, center on what I said before, seeing the customer as not just a customer, but a human being trying to get a job done, feel good about their job towards some important priority or challenge that their company has. Think about their point of view. It's all you have to do. It takes 30 seconds instead of just seeing them as a person who needs to go through a checklist of slides with you. That's not what they are at that moment. Being authentically curious means start with their company's priorities and challenges and really be the student. I think one of the things that happens when I talk to teams so many times is they feel like they have to always be in control of the meeting. They have to have a tight agenda. They have to always be leading the conversation and talking. There's not, we'll get to the silence, embracing silence. And so authentically curious means the customers are actually okay being the teacher if you ask about their business and you become the student, which means you don't have the pressure of having to engage at some level where you're always bringing it back to, okay, what does that mean, to us as a vendor? So being authentically curious means be the student, not the teacher. Going with their flow, and now we're going to get into some stuff that kind of spans personal relationship as well. We all know people that are shifters or one-uppers, which is to say that every time you're done talking, they start a new thread that's important to them. So don't be that way, obviously. And try to make it a conversation, not a set of bullet points of questions that you're asking them. If they say something interesting, follow up on it. Go to the next level. Ask a clarifying question. D, don't take this literally, but it says don't solve or sell. And what that means is try not to interrupt the customer's flow, and you'll start to see how these interrelate to each other. These 5 listening techniques that if you interrupt them and jump back to your point or what you want to get them to do, it has the effect of squelching their kind of openness and their transparency. Just let them talk, and you don't even have to the next point of embracing silence, you don't have to jump in right away when they're finished. If you use Gong, you will see there are great metrics like the listen to talk ratio, the pause score, which is how quickly do you jump in after someone else has finished talking. Give them some space to think. It's amazing to me how, as I've forced myself to become a better listener professionally, when you let them let their last comment land, and let the echo of their words kind of go, that they will pick up the thread and keep going and say something incredibly valuable. And the mute button is the best tool you could ever have in the world for practicing any of these techniques of especially embracing silence. Is just go on mute and ask a question, go on mute. And it forces you to kind of stay in that mode of being the student and listening. And if you do have something to say, it forces you to say, do I really need to go off mute, or should I keep listening? So I think, Jan, I'll throw it to you, but I think the idea is that these are things for discussion, right?
Yep. Yeah. And so just to point out, so we have the breakout session questions. We have a number of resources here. And so if you're looking at the breakout, and I just put them over in the chat. I don't know if anybody wants to try and put the links again over in chat for anybody who doesn't have them. But we're going to be talking about STFU, silence till you finally understand. Yes? Is that STFU?
Fully understand.
Fully understand. I always want to make it finally. Elizabeth, what thoughts or questions did you have?
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Bob. I just wanted to share that, so aligned with everything that has been said. I think embracing the silence is such a gift for the interaction. And just to remind everyone that there isn't anything that can be said that will be as important as what the customers will say. So just to remind ourselves of that, like the customers have such a wealth of information that if we allow them to dig in and share with us, that's the best thing that we can do for us and for them. Just that.
Yeah. Yeah.
At some point, we ought to address what's going on in the chat, and maybe after that, because Trevor's raising some
what's going on
interesting-
in the chat? What do you want to?
Well, I think there's some interesting points about, CS being it's Trevor, it ain't just you, by the way. It's CS being feeling extraordinarily compelled and almost bound to only bring something up if it has value to the customer. And I think that pushes back a little bit against the notion of why would customers want to open up about their business? And the fact is, if you've had, let's say you have 4 QBRs a year with a customer, if you want 3 excellent QBRs, make the first one into more of what I call a UBR. Ask about them, understand how they define value, and then the next 3 meetings will be based on what the customer said was most important to them, instead of every meeting feeling like every bullet point that we have to be talking at them almost. So Trevor, again, I appreciate the dialogue, and I'd be really anxious to share a little bit more. It seems like Ty has also jumped in on this as well. But it's not normal. It's not comfortable always for CS to think this way, but customers love it. They thank me all the time.
Yeah, it does change the relationship when all of a sudden you have like just a, where you sort of dig in on what's happening for them and their experience, whether it's with your product or in the marketplace or just generally just really, I love the questions that you ask, because it kind of, it allows people to sort of react in a way that's different, right? Where all of a sudden, when you say, so, do you think you're going to renew or not, or just like kind of putting them on blank, point on blank, where all of a sudden they might share something with you that they otherwise wouldn't, that maybe they're sort of dancing around. And, it's really, anyway, why don't we go ahead? You see the questions, download the breakout room and notes, so you can go. I'm gonna create the breakout rooms right now. Bob, I think you're gonna move around a little bit
Yeah, I'll
between
surf.
rooms, right?
I'll surf around.
Don't be offended, whichever room he ends up in. Don't be offended if he's moving around. That's what we were planning for today. What kinds of things came up? What did we discover?
I think there's still a group or two that's still meeting.
Oh
right?
yeah. Yeah, it's true. But we can get started.
Yeah.
They're coming. They're coming momentarily. Sandy, what kinds of things did you come?
We all had challenges in different areas. So that was, our group wasn't all in the same area. I think a couple of us were with listening. The other one was asking better questions and staying silent. One question that I had, Bob, was how do you you ask better secondary questions? I feel like if I'm going to be spending time thinking about what to ask as you're talking, then I'm not really listening. So question is
Yeah.
better secondary questions. How do I create those?
Yeah, well, I guess there's a couple things. There's the challenge of listening while processing it enough, what you're hearing, to think about whether you should ask a next level question. Is that what you're asking?
How do I even come up with the second level questions? I think my challenge is I'm curious, but it's broad. Like, how do I ask the second level?
Well, I
question?
think if you imagine that you're trying to connect the dots between what's most important to their company, to their job, and what your solution can offer, then you can ask questions that are not leading questions, but questions that help you understand, are there dots to connect? So if suppose, using the board question example that I gave before, if they say growth, the board's just concerned with growth.
Yeah.
Then a good second level question for that is, so what, because that's also not specific enough really to do anything with. A good second level question would be, so is there sort of one or two big initiatives that are being embraced and pushed throughout the company to achieve this growth that you're talking about? And that's usually helps you get to the next level of below the board level or the senior executive level. And depending on what your product is, right? And it doesn't have to be growth related. It could be cost savings or risk reduction. But asking, what did you mean by that? Or what did you, can you give me an example? Or what's the biggest, is there a big mission or company level sort of mission that's everyone's focused on? Yeah,
Right.
Sarah's saying,
And
can you expand on that? I think it's
I love
expand
that
on it.
though, Bob,
Yeah, go
because
ahead.
like you're kind of digging down, right? And then you say, what are these
Oh, absolutely.
initiatives? And then it's like, well, then has that changed what you're doing? Has that changed how you're using our product or what products you're using? And just like all of those kinds of things, right? Like you can kind of get down to it if you needed to get, to get them to tell you like if your product is important to them or not anymore.
Well, there are
literally
actually
can-
some very specific questions about that to get at that in particular. But I think, remember, you're trying to connect the dots between the value you can offer today and potentially in the future with what's most important to them.
Yeah.
And so if you think of it that way while they're talking, then you can it'll help you think about next level questions. It's a great
Kathy,
question though, Sandy.
Thank you.
yeah, no, it's great. Kathy, do you have a thought or question to share? You're on mute.
I'm on mute. Sean beat me to it, but I was going to say embracing the silence is a really good trick here, Sandy, because that's what I always do when I don't know what to say or don't know what I'm doing. I let somebody else talk, and eventually they'll say something that makes you go like, wait a second, and you'll just have a question. I don't think necessarily you have to dig so hard for them; they'll occur to you. But yeah, I just keep my mouth shut until something happens. If you believe.
So silence isn't your challenge then, Kathy, it sounds like. What other challenges do people have that they discussed? And we also asked, what are you going to try to do over the next 2 weeks? And did anybody come up with something that they want to do over the next 2 weeks?
I had someone in my group mention something that I'm not always great about, which is taking the time in between meetings to reset myself and have the right mindset. I don't think I committed to it in that meeting we just had, but yeah, at least for the next 2 weeks, I'm gonna put more of an effort towards making sure I'm even just switching my meditation up. So I'm doing it, 15 minutes before a meeting versus like in the middle of the day to see what the effects are there. Yeah.
Nice. That's a great resolution. I guess there's, if we take it back to atomic habits, then we can find ways to make a habit of that, right?
There's a lot of comments in the chat.
Cool.
Jan, that you may want to, that people are answering your question, I think.
All right. Sandy's going to try to listen. Kai, what is this? An area of improvement. Do you want to come off mute, Kai?
Yeah, sure. I just need to get better at actually asking more questions, because I think I've always had the instructions from like mentors and stuff that you don't want to ask too much of the customer, and you don't want to come off like you don't know what they need, if that makes sense. And so I think, yes, discovery questions, but I might have like taken that too much to heart, and I need to practice asking, I think, very like deeper questions that will get me the answers I need without a ton of questions related to them.
Yeah. That's great.
Part of that, can I just address that real quick?
Mhm.
Part of that is the way that you set up some of the questions that you ask is what I find works really well is either on the call or even an email before the call, is just to say, hey, in our next meeting, if we have a few minutes, we'd love to take a step back and ask some questions about the business and understand kind of where things are headed. And it helps us understand the market, but it also helps us understand what's important to you, and why your initiatives are so important. And that way we can kind of align the value better of that you need from us. So the step back conversation, it does help the customer understand that, okay, it's a little no one's ever said no to that, by the way. In my experience, no customer has ever said no. You can't ask any step back questions about the business. They might be curious about what that is, and so that's a little technique.
Melissa, I'm really curious about what you said over in the chat about trying to find alternatives for just checking in. Did you get some thoughts about that? Or do you want to maybe ask the group?
Yeah, I think I would love ideas. I think Bob kind of used that phrase, like, can we take a step back? So even the idea of sending an email beforehand I could implement that. But yeah, just looking for ways to kind of enter and open a call that's going to lend itself more to that type of conversation, where it might be something we're both not as used to, or they're not anticipating, or they might kind of give a pause when I use that language of, hey, just calling to check in. What does that really mean? And I think there's a lot of better ways to probably open a conversation.
Yeah, definitely. And Sherry, do you have your hand up to speak to
I
that?
did, because I couldn't find a hand raising thing, and I don't have a mouse, and I'm an idiot with a laptop without a mouse. So, and I'm like, anyway.
Welcome back, by the way. It's nice to see you here
Hi,
tonight.
thanks. Hi, Marianne. I haven't talked to you in like a year. So to answer that question, I have been in that place, and I even find myself, even with a million years of experience, because I was alive with the cavemen, to like sometimes feel like I'm not sure what I'm supposed to be saying. But I think in terms of openers, and by all means, people jump in, I think what you can do is, what's going on in their market? What kind of customers do you serve? Do you know anything that's going on with the industry? Can you Google any news about their company? And you can say, hey, I heard this is happening. How is that impacting you? Is this impacting your organization? And if it is, like, you can go down that route. Like, how is it impacting your team? Right? Did their CEO say something like, right now you're in a good place, it's the beginning of the year? I heard your CEO said, these are the top 2 priorities for this year. How is that going to, what does that look like for you in terms of your team and contributing to those goals? And you can start the conversation there, because now you start to give them an opportunity to be heard. And you can just have a conversation. Don't sit there and think, how am I going to give value? You're already having value. You know something. Don't feel like you have to, be so prescriptive like a doctor and write them up. Oh, this is your problem. Here's a prescription. You're good. Bye-bye. Go to CVS. That's not how it has to work. You're having the conversation, and that conversation builds a rapport. It builds some trust, and might lead you to another conversation. Or in a week or two, you could say, you know, I've somebody else is doing something similar, and here's a workflow that I think might help you if you need X and Y. And I'm clearly spitballing, but now they're more apt to listen because they already know, you know, and are invested, and you can build on that. So that's just one thing that I could think of.
Yeah. And also kind of on that same point, but extended over to Jessica, your comment about how to get more stakeholders at the meeting. I know that back when I was an individual contributor, part of what we would do is we would have at least once a year where we would sort of present all of the marketplace trends that were happening, because we were in a unique position in the industry to be able to see what strategies everyone was using. And so we didn't put names to it, but we would say, this is what we see trending. And then we would basically say, so how does that fit with your goals and your initiatives and what you're doing in your company? How, you know, and basically the whole point of the meeting was to have a discussion like that. And so, you know, those were, you know, standing room only, you know, like everybody who was, you know, like that we wanted to have in that room, they were all there. And we, you know, also arranged ahead of time, like what those agendas would be. And we brought, you know, key people on our side as well, right? So when you have a meeting like that, then you're more likely able to follow up at other sort of key times, you know, to do that follow up with the executive stakeholders. You know, that does take a change. That is an intentional to set up something like that. But you know, it takes effort. But I think the point is to have meaningful discussions like that. I don't
Can
know,
I just
Bob,
weigh?
we're saying a lot of things you probably want to weigh in on.
Well, just that what you said and what Sherry said are both so smart from the perspective that one thing I hear a lot from customers themselves is, so there's a question that it's going to make Trevor, you know, break out in hives, but, or his team. But the question is, hey, if you got a call from one of our competitors tomorrow, how would you react on a scale 1 to 5? 1 is you'd probably ignore. 5 is you'd get back to them and find out what they're offering and what they do, how much. And the reason customers say 5, yeah, Trevor's team, the reason customers say 5 a lot is not because they're leaving. It's because they're craving context. They always say, Bob, we're just one company using this product. We don't know if it's the right use case. We don't know what's best. We just have such a narrow lens. And so a competitor's webinar, a competitor's pitch, a competitor's market insights might help us. And so we're not cheating on you necessarily. We're trying to do our jobs better. Like, again, stop thinking everything's about your product. It is them trying to get the job done more effectively. Your solution is a tool to help them get their job done better. So they really do need context. And that's why those market insights things that Jan, you just talked about are so effective.
If you have something like that to share, then yeah, that makes.
I think
makes
you
a
got to.
difference.
Well, I think you have to do it. You have to get your whatever the product team or the. There is too much on the shoulders, in my opinion, of CS.
Yeah.
Of trying to add value, and I'll just say, I was trying to say this in my last breakout, and I disconnected myself from the breakout room. Just that one thing you guys, we all have to realize that we're up against is this tremendous, kind of like bubble wrap that the customer has put themselves in because they think every conversation is going to be about our product and it's what's important for us. So it takes time to change that mindset. We have, like, since the first caveman ever sold the first wheel or whatever, there have been 10 million sales conversations since then, vendor conversations, and every one of them is about the product. So customers are like kind of like leaning back, and it takes a while to make sure they understand, no, I'm not asking about the product. I'm saying what's going on in the board meeting, regardless of what we sell. I'm just asking what's going on in your business. They go, oh, really? You want to know that? Okay. And then they open up and they talk 75% of the conversation.
Yeah.
So, but that's what we're up against here.
Yeah, no, it's true, because we got to change business as usual. Sean.
Yeah, I'll just briefly mention that, you know, we shouldn't undervalue the exercise of pulling up the customer journey regularly and looking at it from the perspective that maybe a marketer or customer marketing team to look at it, right? For CS folks, this is a muscle that I think we need to realize is one that requires development over time. And, creating a content calendar around specific stages of the journey, or, customer traction or performance benchmarks or whatever it is, right? Helping to seed your team with discovery, topics and questions to help them get better at this over time. And that's something that I've, tried to keep in mind, especially when working with folks that are new or coming from other disciplines into CS, that, they may not think in the way that I've been taught or trained, coming from sales, years and years ago, and spending all of this time in CS over the last decade. So just food for thought.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you. All right, Sarah, I'm going to have you as our last one, even though I think we could probably stay here all night. It's been such a pleasure to have you around, Bob. Sarah, what thoughts did you have?
Thanks, Jan. One final thought that, just to kind of build off of what we've been talking about here in the last few comments, is to actually keep up on the news for your accounts can help you bring up these conversations around specific topics more naturally that may be top of mind. I've had the luxury of working with products where the company being in the news is something that our product would help with. And so anytime that my my Google alerts would go off for my customers, it would be, hey, I saw that X, Y, or Z happen. Out of curiosity, like, how is your company responding to this internally? And so that's when I would start getting those details on what they were doing internally. And then that gave me an opportunity to say, have you considered looking into it from this angle as well? And kind of take more of that consultative approach. And then, of course, have our product there as a potential solution. But it kind of gave me a more targeted question to start the conversation and then kind of build out from there. So if you ever have a customer that's just very much so against opening up, having a very specific topic that is in the news or, whatever the case might be, can help kind of open them up, because then you've taken the time to research and they know that you're invested in the company because you already know about this.
Yeah. Yep. And like Elizabeth is saying over in the chat, just making certain that they're not repeating themselves if possible as well, right? If they've already shared it, you can make reference to it and then build on it, kind of thing, right? Depending upon where they've contributed that. So, well, thank you. This is just so incredible. Thank you so much. I hope that you've taken something away from today. Next week, we will be digging into how to qualify these conversations, how to qualify them into leads, whether you're fulfilling that or if someone else is. There's still a lot involved in recognizing the business potential of these conversations. So that's what we'll be talking about. And then after that, negotiations, and then let me know what other ideas you have. Bob, thanks so much again.
It was my pleasure. What a valuable service you are providing to this community.
Aw,
yeah,
thanks.
Big time.
Well, I gotta say it's a labor of love. We do love this community. So if folks don't have links to the Slack community or any of the LinkedIn groups, that sort of thing, go to the CxXchange. That's CxXchange.com. That's where you'll find everything. All right. We'll see you next time. Hope to see you
Thanks,
next
everybody.
week. All right. Bye.
Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode of Success Hour, formerly known as CS Office Hours. We regularly put out new content, so to be the first to know, like this episode, tap that notification bell, hit that subscribe button, and we look forward to seeing you soon.